How are you today? Welcome back. I hope that you've had some time to think about our last teaching. And I wanted to start a series today on women in the Bible. I know it's kind of leaping around a little bit, but I think these women are so important. And right now, in our time in history, there's so much chaos and confusion going on, and there's dialogue and a lot of verbiage about the role of women. But these women in this Bible are so colossally wonderful. We read a lot about the men in the Bible, and they really are the heroes. You know, they're strong, they're men of God, and they're powerful in many, many ways. But the women are just as powerful as the guys. And some of the things that they do they're heroines. They really are heroines. They're not wearing a cape, and they're not walking around with a cord that is a magic rope or anything, but they are heroines. And they're beautiful in themselves, in their stories, in the things that they say and do. It's incredible, absolutely incredible, some of the things that they're doing. And so I wanted to start off today with Hagar. And I don't know how much you know about Hagar. Sometimes I think Hagar has gotten a really bad rap, but she shouldn't. She's in the lineage of the Lord. You know, she's listed there. So the time frame that we're in is a time as the Jews are getting ready to cross over the Jordan into Canaan. Moses has passed away, and he's passed the mantle, if you will, on to Joshua, who is going to be the general who will take them in. You know the song Joshua at the Battle of Jericho? Well, you know, we don't really think how serious that is. But the Battle of Jericho was pretty phenomenal, the way that God revealed himself. So we have on the east side of the Jordan River, we have this encampment, this huge encampment of Jewish people waiting to go into the promised land. And so they're going to go in, and then they're going to take the land as God has instructed them to do. Remember, God made this promise to Abram several generations previous, like 430 years prior to this. This is your land. This is your land, and it's my land, and you and your progeny will inherit this land forever. And when he said forever, I don't think he meant just a couple thousand years. I think he meant forever. And that's one of those things, either you believe the word or you don't. I believe it. So I believe this land belongs to the Jewish people even yet today. And I kind of have a little soapbox about that. So I want us to go to Joshua, the second chapter of Joshua. Now, Jericho was known as the Moon City. Also, it was called the City of Palms. And it was just really an amazing fortified city because it had several streams, several little rivulets that came into the city. It was like an oasis in the desert. Now, if you've been to Israel, then you undoubtedly know where Jericho is. It's like just as at the head of the Negev, just at the top of the desert. And you can go straight down the Jordan River from the Galilee to Jericho. And when you get to Jericho, you're at a T, an intersection there. You can turn right and go up the mountains to Jerusalem, or you can keep going south and go down to Qumran, the Dead Sea, and on down to Eilat. And so this is where they are, just across from Jericho. Now, Joshua was one of the 12 spies that Moses sent out. You all know that. And he sent out 12 spies, 10 came back with a good report. 2 came back with a good report, 10 came back with a bad report. Joshua and Caleb were the ones that came back with a good report. And so now Joshua learned from that little boo-boo that Moses made. And so now he's only going to send in 2 spies. And he's going to send them in to Canaan to spy out the land as a military general would do. He needs to know the lay of the land. Remember, they've not been there. So he needs to know the lay of the land, and particularly Jericho, because Jericho is so strong and so fortified, and he needs to know exactly what they're up against at Jericho, because as far as he knows, they're going to go in with arms and they're going to go into battle. So we want to go now to Joshua chapter 2 and Rahab. Now, Rahab has been called a harlot. Scripture calls her harlot. And it all depends on how you define harlot. According to Strong's Concordance, a harlot is one who commits adultery or one who commits idolatry. Now, according to the Torah, Anyone who doesn't follow God, the one true God, is an idolater. Now, that doesn't mean that they're bowing before idols all day long and stuff like that, but they're an idolater. And so she could have been an idolater or she could have been an adulterer. I'll let you worry about that. What I want to talk about is her business. And her business was she had an inn. And the inn was built into the wall of Jericho. Now, remember, these walls are really thick. In fact, I read somewhere that they were so thick that they used to have chariot races around the wall. And they are thick. There's no question about it. And they have to be thick enough to have houses into the walls. In fact, this is part of their fortification. And you know, if you have a house in the wall, you're going to make sure that wall's strong where your house is. Think about Nehemiah. So anyhow, Jericho is a city that goes back to 7,000 BC. That's like a lot older than I am. I was way back there, way back there. So anyhow, Jericho is an old city. It's a strong city, and now the spies are going into Jericho. And so we pick up in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, Then Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, Go view the land, especially Jericho. And so they went in, and they went to the house of Rahab, and they lodged there. Now, because she had an inn, and maybe because she was a harlot, no one thought that much about strangers coming to her house and staying there. However, it's a small town, and gossip gets around in small towns pretty fast. Well, these guys are dressed differently. They don't look like they belong in Jericho. They're strangers. They're traveling through. And Jericho's on high alert, code red. They're on high alert because they know those Jews are down the mountain. They're just down the hill. It's 5 miles from where they are up to Jericho. And they know what's going on. Now, they don't have binoculars in those days, but let me tell you, they're watching to see what happens. And so when the word gets out, there's 2 strangers that are dressed like those Jewish people, and they're in the house of Rahab. Then the king sends his guys out there to knock on the door and say, hey, what's going on? And so we enter the story here. Verse 3, And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who've come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, Yes, the men did come to me, but they're gone now. And then she goes on to say, Now, if you hurry, you might be able to catch them. I don't know. I think they went back down the hill. I didn't know who they were, but it makes sense to me that they would have gone back down the hill, back to their people. So the king's men, and she said they got out before the gate closed. Now, the gate would close at dark. All gates would close at dark because that was just the way they kept out the riffraff of all the cities. So anyhow, she encourages them to go back down the hill and to look for them there. In the meantime, she's hidden them on the rooftop under the flax that she has lying up there on her roof to dry. And so she goes up there, and when the coast is clear, she goes up there and says to them, okay, now you can come out. Let's talk. Always, let's talk. Okay. And so then let's go back to Joshua 2. She said, verse 8. Now, before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof, and she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land. I know. How does she know that? I know the Lord has given you the land. And she says, Lord, this Lord, God, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. I mean, they're so scared. They're shaking in their sandals. They're so scared. They're scared. And so she says, and we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. We heard about that. I mean, no telephone, telegraph, tell a woman kind of thing, but they had heard. The stories had gone forth. Somebody went forward and told how God had dried up the sea. So there were some onlookers there, you can bet on that. And they went across on dry land. And then we heard how, and what you did to the 2 kings, the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. We heard about it. We got it. We know. We're scared. We are so scared we don't know what to do. And so she's talking about this. And she says, and when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Hey, that's a testimony. Did you believe it? It is a testimony. It's a testimony as to who God is. Now, this woman's a harlot. Whether she's an idolater or a prostitute, I don't know. But she is confessing the God above as the one true God. She's got it. She's heard it, and the only thing she's afraid of is not saving her family. So she goes on then and she says, swear to me by the Lord, that since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with me and my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, a pledge of faithfulness. Now, we know this, that she was separated from her family. We don't know why. Was she married and became a widow? We don't know what the story is. What do you want the story to be? That's what it can be. But she was living in this inn in the wall, and she was conducting business there, whatever that business was. Her family, her father's household was over here, another part of the city. Were they estranged? We don't know. We have no idea what was going on. So there again, it's up to you to hypothesize whatever you want the story to be. However, she loves her family, and she wants them cared for when the Jews come, because she knows they're coming. So, and she says to them, we've heard it, we know it's happening. In verse 13, she says, spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death, because she knows that when they come, they're going to wipe out the city. It's not just about, oh, well, you surrender and we'll let you be here and be slaves. They're going to wipe it out, wipe it clean, because this is what God has told them to do. Clean it up. Clean it up. Get rid of everybody. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? But you're going to see that again and again and again. And the reason God did that, because he knew if you didn't clean house, it was only going to get worse, because they saw this with the Midianites. They've seen it again and again and again. If you don't annihilate everyone there, it won't be long before they assimilate with you and you assimilate with them, and their God becomes your God, and most likely your God doesn't become theirs, and it just messes the whole thing up. So the whole point is to annihilate them. Get rid of them. Be done with them. So she says, we know this is going to happen. So when this happens, I have been good to you. Remember, I took care of you. When the soldiers came, I lied. I told them you'd already gone. I laid my life on the line. And truly she did. Because had the soldiers found these spies, they would have taken them into captivity, and they would have tortured them and killed them. And she also would have been tortured and killed, because she was giving aid to the enemy. Yeah, nothing different today, is there? I mean, really. Okay, so she says, all right, I took care of you. Verse 9, she says, I know. Verse 10, she says, we have heard. Verse 11, we heard, our hearts melted, we have no courage. The Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and God here below. That's her testimony. And then verse 13, she says, spare my family. She knows it's going to happen. And so they say to her, okay, we'll do this. However, there are strings attached. And the string is a red cord, which I just happen to have one here, scarlet cord. Actually, I didn't go out and buy this. God provided it. So he said to her, said, take this cord and put it in your window. Now, the window's in the wall. The back side of the house has a window, and it's the wall. And you hang this scarlet cord in the window, like so. And this will tell our guys when they come, don't mess with this house. The rest of them, yes, but not this one. And then they also said something else, which I think is colossal. And what they said was, but in order for us to guarantee the safety of your family, you must get them in here. They have to come here to your house and stay. For you don't know what hour of the day or night that we're coming in. And when we do, we can't walk around town and say, well, are you Rahab's family? So they have to be here in the house with you, here in your home. But then they took it one step further, and they said, you can't tell them why they have to come and stay in the house. And once they're in the house, they can't go out. they're there. They're right there. You have to get them into your house and get them to stay in your house without telling them why. Could a harlot do that? Could a prostitute do that? I mean, after all, you stop to think about this whole thing. Excuse me. And you think about today, most of us are men and women of God who are listening to this teaching. And we have children and we have grandchildren. And the wolf is baying at our door. And I don't know about you, but I feel like when trouble comes, I want to know where my family is. I want to know where my kids are. You know, I live in Oklahoma. We have tornadoes. I don't think that big a deal of them because I grew up in Oklahoma and I know what to do, how to protect myself. But, excuse me, my children know the same. However, and they're adults. My children are adults. Excuse me. Even so, adult children, we still worry about, don't we? And so if I said to them, come to my house, a tornado's coming. If they're in close proximity, they'll come. Otherwise, they're going to do their own thing. And none of us know which way the tornado's going to go. But I always want let's all be together when it happens. And so this is what the spies are saying to her. You all be together when it happens, when we come, because we're coming in like a tornado. We're coming in to bring death and destruction. And we can only guarantee those who are in your house at the time. And you can't tell them why they have to stay there. So let's just say she gets them all in and somebody wants to go to the market and get a loaf of bread. Too late. Can't do it. Stay in the house. Can't tell them why. The reason they can't tell them why is because little towns have big ears, and big ears have big mouths. And if you tell them why, then it's going to get out, and the whole scenario will be blown. So she puts the cord in the window. She gets her family in. The spies go back, and then they're waiting. Can you imagine Jericho sitting there waiting? Okay, now we have the crossing of the river. Now, this is at flood stage. It's at Pesach. It's at flood stage. And so when they cross that river, they have to have the priests go first. And when the priests put their feet into, and they're carrying the ark, when they go into the river, when they step into the river, it stops. It backs up, and it becomes like a dam. Once again, the water divides, and here they go across. And can you imagine being in Jericho and seeing this? And believe me, they had to have seen it because it's that close. Okay, so terrifying as that might be, then when they get across, guess what they do? They circumcise the men. They get across, they set up camp, and then they circumcise the men. Because the men who came out of Egypt had been circumcised. But the men who were born in the desert in that 40-year time frame had not been circumcised. I don't know why. They just hadn't. So they have to circumcise the men. And I looked this up, and it takes 3 weeks for an adult man's circumcision to heal. It can take longer, for 3 weeks. Now remember, these guys are going to go to war. They're going to be marching. They're going to be running. They need to be whole. And they do a circumcision on the west side of the Jordan River. And they're keeping the Jericho people just wondering what on earth is going on. Now, I'm going to do my little commercial here. I wanted to tell you about this book. This is Genesis Triangle. It's a book I wrote. And it's about Rachel, Leah, and Jacob. And it has all the stories in here about the patriarchs and the matriarchs. I think you'll enjoy it. You can get it from me. You can get it from Amazon. It's one of the books I've written, and I have some more coming out soon. I also have another book called Who Will Kill the Spiders. All right, back to Jericho. Can you imagine the watchman on the wall of Jericho looking down and seeing these guys laying out in the sun, sunbathing, doing whatever it is that they're doing because they are resting from the circumcision, and the guys in Jericho have to be shaking in their sandals because they don't know what's going to happen next. And then finally Joshua says, okay, let's go. And so what do? They get the priest ahead of them, and they go into they start circling Jericho, and they circle it once a day, every day, for 7 days. Now, we talk about the miracle of Jericho and the walls falling down, but you know what they had to do? They had to circle it in silence. Silence that was deafening. Now, I'll tell you what, that's a miracle in itself. To get any body of people that large walking and not talking, it's a pretty big miracle right there. And so for 7 days, they walked around in a circle. The priests with the ark, and then the tribes of Israel in marching order marched around. Now, probably the wives and children sat at the riverbank and waited. But the men of warring age marched around Jericho every day, one time a day, for 6 days. And then, on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times, again in silence. And then at the end of the 7th trip around, they blew the shofar and they shouted, and the walls came tumbling down. Now, if you've been there, you've seen it. A lot of people don't believe that. I have been there. I can give testimony to the fact that the walls did come tumbling down. And it's a really interesting thing, because German excavations from 1907 to 1909 on the northern section of the site uncovered a portion of the lower city wall that did not fall, as everywhere else did. The still standing section rose as high as 8 feet, with houses against it still intact. One of those had to be the house of Rahab, the harlot, who knew the one true God. So the earth opened up and the walls just down. And then the battle was on. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people just threw up their arms and ran. I'm sure a lot of people just surrendered, whatever. But the battle was on and the annihilation began, except for Rahab and her family. And they were rescued and brought out. And so there are rumors out there, of course, small town rumors, you know how that goes. But the rumor is that Rahab married Joshua. But that's not true. If we look over here in Matthew, in the lineage of the Lord, Matthew 1, it's the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. To Abraham was born Isaac, and to Isaac Jacob, and to Jacob Judah and his brothers, and to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And to Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron Ram, and to Ram was born Amminadab, and Amminadab Nahshon. And to Salmon was born Boaz by Rahab. So we have a couple of miracle stories here. And we're going to get into another teaching soon on Ruth, because she is the mother of Obed. So what we have here is a woman that you and I might shake our fingers at, and we might go at, but the point being is she was a woman of God. She had come to know the one true God. And you know, any day, it's never too late. We always like to have somebody come into that relationship with the Father early on in their life. But not everyone does, because a lot of people have to walk through their own desert before that happens. And we know that these Jews had just walked through 40 years of a desert experience. It took them 40 years to get it right, to become a people, to become united with the Torah and to understand the Torah and to begin observing the Torah and doing all the things that God has taught them to do. If it took them 40 years, why would we be tutting at someone who was not raised in that realm, had not had that kind of teaching, and all of a sudden, even with her idolatry background or her prostituting background, all of a sudden she recognizes the one true God. And why did she recognize him? Because of the testimonies that had gone forth. The testimony of what had done when they came out of Egypt. She didn't even say anything about the 10 plagues, did she? Maybe she didn't even know about them, but she knew about the crossing over. She knew about crossing the Red Sea. And the Red Sea is not a small body of water, let me tell you. It is not. It's a huge body of water. And to cross it wasn't, I mean, you couldn't swim. I suppose if you're Mark Spitzer, you could swim it. But most people couldn't swim it. Most people could only boat it. And yet here they are. They walked across on dry land. And then we know that the Pharaoh's chariots and his horsemen and all those people were drowned in the sea, all of them. Now, I've heard the story as well. It was only 6 inches deep. Well, that's even a greater miracle, because if it's only 6 inches deep, how did it drown Pharaoh and his horses and his horsemen? I mean, think about it. Come on. You know, some of the stuff that people come up with is kind of bizarre. But then sometimes some of the things I come up with could be a little bizarre as well. The point being, we have a woman of Jericho who was a Gentile, who was an idol worshiper or a prostitute, or maybe even both, I don't know. But she came to know the one true God because of the testimonies that had gone forth. She said, we have heard. We have heard. What do you hear? You hear a testimony given forth by someone else. And what is your testimony? You know, what do you tell your friends about what God has done for you? What is your encounter with him? What have you been able to say to him and say to your friends about that relationship with him? And we all have it. I mean, one level or another. We don't have to be superstars to have a relationship with the Father. All we have to do is be pure in our relationship with him, pure in our love for him. I'm not saying that you have to be perfect before you can come to him, because that's not even the point. The point being, we all have a relationship with the Father, and that relationship is our testimony. How do we come there? How do we know? And then when we hear, when we're in the Word, we're in the Word, we're in the Word, hopefully we're in the Word a lot. And then our testimony comes forth, and we can say to the people around us, I know God because of this, because of this situation.